unity and coherence, to cohere together, and yet respect the fundamental differences that are in us. And traditional Islamic civilizations were extremely adept at this, that we created civilizations that could house the entire human family and protect them as well. كنتم خير أمة أخرجت للناس. You are the best community brought forth for humankind. Imam al-Bukhari says that means you are the best of people, or we might say you must be the best of people for all people. And when God says in the Quran that we are ummatun wasat, we are a middle nation, meaning that we're balanced between extremes. We don't go too far to the left. We don't go too far to the right. We are not extremists and rigid and violent. And on the other hand, we're not lax and lackadaisical either. We find the middle path, which is always the best, always has the best attributes. But Allah says, لِتَكُونُوا شُهَدَاءَ عَلَى النَّاسِ, in order that you be witnesses over humankind. And what does that mean? It actually means many things, like everything that the Quran does. The Quran has infinite meanings. Interestingly though, many of the earliest tafsirs of the Quran will say that so you be witnesses over mankind means so you be protectors of mankind, protectors of all human beings, not just Muslims, but protectors of everyone else. And they compare it then to the verse in the Quran when God says that He sent down the Quran muhaiminan, as a protector of the revelation that was before it. So the Quran comes to protect and to restore and to enlighten us about all of the revelations that were ever sent to any prophet or any messenger in time. So also we are meant to be protectors of humankind. And we have a remarkable legacy in that regard. So this is one of the things that we want to talk about tonight. And the Ottoman Empire, which is one of the expressions of Islamic civilization, very credible in my mind. Ottomans did great things. But Ghazi Uthman, who is the first ruler of the Ottoman family, he had a dream that a moon came out of the heart of his sheikh and came into his heart. And then a beautiful sycamore tree came up from him. The sycamore tree was a sacred symbol in the Ottoman Empire. And it spread its branches out to the east and the west, and all the nations of the earth took refuge under that tree. And this is a credible story, because the Ottoman Empire was like that. When the Jews were being forced out of Spain and Portugal, Muslim Spain and Portugal, which was their greatest period in history, the Jews probably never flourished in history as they flourished in Spain and Portugal. They had brilliant times in their history before that and after that, but probably that's the highest ever. And then when the Crusaders begin to conquer Muslim Spain and Portugal, of course they will force the Jews to become Christians. They will come down on them, with the sledgehammer. And they will also come down on us as well, once they get control over us. But many Jews will take refuge in the Ottoman Empire. And when Muhammad the Conqueror conquers Istanbul, Constantinople, he makes it Istanbul, Islamopolis is what it is, the city of Islam. Then he invites all the Jews of the world to come. And they helped him and they loved him. And they also built an economy. And they do other things as well. And in fact, when the Ottomans begin to lose, then the Russians and others who are defeating them, especially the Russians, they often begin to carry out pogroms against the Jews, massacres, genocide. And one of the Ottoman emperors told the Russians when they conquered Romania, which was under the Muslims for hundreds of years, if you do not cease persecuting the Jews, we will reconquer Romania, despite our weakness, just to protect them. And I don't believe that that's propaganda or just political talk. So in our history, we were the defenders of other faiths. The Ottomans, for example, again, in the 15th century, the 1400s, there was in what is today Czechoslovakia, or the Czech Republic, more properly, there was a Christian reformer named John Huss. We called him Martin Luther 100 years before Martin Luther. But Huss actually, and the Hussites, his followers, actually wrote letters to the Ottoman emperor saying, conquer our land. Conquer our land. Because only then do we have a chance of survival. Otherwise, we will be destroyed by the Church of Rome, which ultimately happened. Because the Ottomans just couldn't do that. They can't just conquer at will. But we have this amazing legacy of bringing unity among ourselves and then housing under the branches of that unity, like that sycamore tree, different Muslim sects, no matter what they were. They will also be protected. And also Christians with all their different sects, Nestorians, Jacobites, Malachites, whatever they might be, and the Jews as well with their different variations. So this is a great history, and this is the history of unity in multiplicity, unity in diversity. And I want to talk a little bit tonight about how we did it. How we did it. And of course that's a big story which we won't be able to cover, but we can touch on some points there. But as Hassan Eaton said, who was a man that I had the honor to meet, he died a few years ago. He was one of the great spokesmen of our religion. But he said that Islam spread its peacock's tail from east to west, which I love that metaphor. And metaphors, powerful expressions, are very important, aren't they? They can illuminate and lift us up, and they can do the opposite as well. We've got to be, wordsmiths. We have to coin the right expressions. We have to speak on our behalf. We have to do it very intelligently, with the intelligence, the genius of a poet or a poetess. But the peacock's tail, that stuck in my mind. I love that because it shows great diversity. Of course, you could take another metaphor, which is really disastrous, and that is the clash of civilizations, which is a lie, which is propaganda. And if we were to talk about that, the clash of civilizations, which you associate with Samuel Huntington, there's a whole history of searching for the right word, the crescent of crisis. That we are the crescent of crisis. We are the revolution of something, I don't remember. But they tried all sorts of terms, but none of them worked. The crescent of crisis, no, that's not sinister enough, right? But clash of civilizations, that was actually a term developed by the YMCA in the 1930s, by YMCA missionaries, but they discovered it. Samuel Huntington discovered it. He said, this is gold. Well, this is arsenic. This will really work. So we have to always be thinking about, we want to be honest, but we also want to be expressive. And this is, of course, the age of the sound bite. Heaven help us. And the soundbite is very important. Malcolm X, I became a Muslim through Malcolm X. He was the master of the soundbite. All the ones I can think of are very aggressive and very political, the ballot or the bullet. But it works, you know, try me. That's another soundbite of Malcolm X, try me. But he had also beautiful ones. And so we have to be expressive. We have to learn, you know, how to express ourselves. And especially, you know, people like yourself, I really respect you tremendously. I know you are a gifted nation, highly intelligent people. But these great universities like this one really have a lot of talent. And so we have to also learn, how do we speak about ourselves? And where do we get the language that we want? I'm an American, of course, and if I'm going to do that, then I'm going to want to look to people like Malcolm X, Muhammad Ali, God have mercy on them, and others, even W.E. Muhammad, others, because they have powerful ways of saying things that really get the message over and affect the people. Sound bites. And then also we need to all be on the same page, right? That when certain questions are asked, what will we say? And there, basically, I need to memorize something. You know, something that's a soundbite. One of my problems, if you don't already know already, is it's almost impossible for me to give a short, simple answer. This is one of my greatest failures in life, right? And when I give these long, elaborate answers, of course, that doesn't work, you know, in the public at large, does it? It might work in a seminar, but you know, we have to learn also how to speak briefly, how to have answers to give on every issue, whatever it may be. In any case, we were people who had this remarkable skill to bring everybody together. Ourselves, which you might call the majoritarian Muslim community, and then all the branches of the Muslim community that differ from us in certain details of theology. We were able, and then the Jews, the Christians, the Magians, and everyone else. And I don't know where you would find in history, again, we could talk about this because there are parallels here and there. Like, for example, the Achaemenid Empire of Persia. Cyrus the Great, that was a great man. Cyrus the Great was a great man. And Persia did have also this ideal of an ecumenical world. And the Jews call Cyrus the Great Messiah because he allowed them to return back to Palestine, and he facilitated for Ezra, or Hosea, the building of the Second Temple. But, you know, so you have parallel, and in fact, probably he was a muwahhid. Probably Cyrus was a muwahhid. And, you know, so you have parallels in history, but we really have a good record there. And this is one of the greatest legacies that we could ever offer to humanity today. And Arnold Toynbee understood that very well, because he saw that after World War II, by virtue of modern technology, modern global economics, especially in its colonial and post-colonial forms, that the whole human family has been forced to come together. And of course, it becomes more that way, doesn't it? I remember I used to love languages, and one of the things about the United States of America is that basically we've got one. We don't necessarily know how to speak it very well. But we've got one language, and I always wanted to learn other languages, and I had my two-way radio. And I'd get up at night and try to find, oh, there's Russian. I can listen to Russian. There's German. And it'd go in and out, and in and out. And of course, today it's just open up your internet, right? You can have poetry or anything you want. The world's all together. You know, so when it's together like that, it also needs something that makes it cohere together. This is unity in diversity. Something that can give it meaning as a human family. And Toynbee knew that that had to be religious if it was to be real. That you've got to give religious meaning to human beings. Nothing else will work for them. And he believed that human beings, as a number of important anthropologists and sociologists of the 21st century have also believed, that human beings are incurably religious. That we are homo religiosus. We are man, the religious, how do you get that? We are man, the religious animal. And our religious instinct is said to be the strongest one we have. Stronger than any appetite we have. And so therefore you have to have religious solutions to these things. If we're going to bring humanity together. Today in the world, we have new religious movements. Do you know of any? Go on the internet, you can find some. New religious movements. A new religious movement is born in the world today every 12 hours. 2 a day. And what does that mean to you? I don't know what it means to you. To me it means we are desperate. We have got to have a religious formulation that makes sense of the chaos that we're living in. And that makes sense of all these complexities of religious and social and political history that we live in. Right? So you have the new religious movements, they are dealing with that issue. Sometimes they deal with it in a very negative way. A lot of them are extremists. Some of them are violent. And they're not just Muslim, they can be Buddhist, they can be Japanese Buddhist, Zen, they can be Hindu, they can be other things as well. But human beings have a desperate need for religion. And if you give them good religion, then you give them something that makes them truly human. If you give them bad religion, then you can make them into beasts. But Toynbee knew that Muslims have the ability to do this. We've done it in the past. In the past, we have been able to house the whole human family. Chinese, Confucians, Taoists, Hindus, Jains, Buddhists, Magians, whatever they may be. And Islam could do it again. But for Toynbee, the problem is with the Muslims. And that's because of the fact that they don't get it. And he was talking, of course, in the colonial period, when the stamp on so many of us was one of being bewildered about the West and its power and lacking self-esteem and self-confidence regarding ourselves and not really knowing even who we were or what we were. After all, it had all been disassembled and taken apart during the colonial period, and it would be even worse in the post-colonial period. So he said the problems with the Muslims, they don't get it. They won't be able to do it. But he wasn't talking about people like you. You are a new generation. And you are a generation who, again, to use the words of my beloved Hassan Eaton, whom I had the honor to visit before he died, you are galactic travelers. Did you know that about yourself? Galactic travelers, Star Wars. You know, because you can go between the galaxy of Islam and the Islamic tradition, and especially, I want to say, the great traditions of these lands, the Indus Valley, which are rich. That's your legacy, that's your heritage. And you can negotiate that, and whether you can do that very well at the moment or not, I don't know, but you can certainly learn how to do that. And then you can go to the other galaxy, which is the secular modern West. So for many Muslims, it's impossible for them to understand that. They know it's powerful, they know it's rich, they know other things about it. A lot of it can be mythological and not true, but they don't understand it. And it's almost impossible to make them understand it. But I don't think that's the case with you. And so therefore you are a very special generation, because we together, we can begin to produce a synthesis, which is an authentic interpretation of our tradition and our humanity that works today, that fits in the world today. And if you can do that, you win. You win. Atlantic Monthly, which is one of our better journals in the United States, founded by Emerson and Thoreau and other great literary figures in the 19th century before the Civil War. Atlantic Monthly had a really interesting edition. I think it was in 2000, it might have been in 2001, and it had on it these gods all lined up. And it was saying that this will be the century of the rivalry of the religions. And I had to get that copy because I believe that who can do the work? Will it be the Christians or neo-Christians? The Jews or neo-Christians? Or Judeo-Christians or neo-Hindus? The Hindus have lots. The Hindus are pretty smart about these things, and they're able to respond to these situations. Will it be the Buddhists or neo-Buddhists? Will it be a secular alternative to religion? But this is so important. How do you make people cohere? So historically we were able to do that. And one of the things about the modern age is that modernity, which is very much a Western phenomenon, modernity has a lot to do with the fact that the West, in its development over the last 500 years, gutted its metaphysics. It gutted the metaphysics, religious philosophy, if you will, that had been its inspiration in the High Middle Ages. Thomas Aquinas, for example, who was really a remarkable person. So they scrapped that. And then they have new worldviews, the Cartesian worldview, Kantian worldview, and so forth. But ultimately what they will do is that they will scuttle the boat. And Toynbee and Springer, there are other people, they understood this very well, that those beliefs, those metaphysical truths that inspired us and made us cohere in the past, we don't have them anymore. They're gone. Springer called that the fall of the West. Toynbee, when he wrote his great study of history, which is a great book, his main concern there was what? The fall of civilization. Not the rise of civilization. We will talk about that also. But his main inspiration is the fall of civilization. Why? Because he said about our own Western civilization, we are not falling, we have fallen. It's just that civilizations don't die overnight like some of us do. They take 100 years. They take 200 years. They take time to do that. So Toynbee understood that you've got to get something back that will give you life. And Toynbee would also say it's got to be religious in nature. Now, in the modern age, you have attempts to create cohesion in society. And a number of those preach the doctrine of uniformity. And here you could look at the fascists, the Nazis. They don't like ethnic diversity. They don't like other types of differences. There's no place for the Jews in Germany, even if they have been there for how many years. You see it in the communists and Joseph Stalin, the cult of Joseph Stalin. You see it in Mao Zedong and Maoist China. You see it in other things like the Khmer Rouge of Cambodia, Pol Pot. What a story. Everybody's the same, right? So it doesn't make any difference if you're a peasant or if you're a city dweller. Get out of the city. All city dwellers, get out of the cities. Go to the country. be peasants. We're all the same. We're all equal. And then, of course, they begin to starve and they begin to die. And there's also, there's also genocide as well. And in the end, he brings about the genocide of what? A quarter of his people? 1/4 of his people? But these are attempts to get uniformity in enforced uniformity. And uniformity has its place. Uniformity is not wrong. We have uniformity in the uniforms we wear in the army, for example. But that's a different type of thing. That's identity. But I have to know what your rank is. I have to know what your training is. I have to know what you are. So uniforms help us to do that. Right? Okay, I see your uniform. I know what you are. I know what you can do and so forth. But this is imposed uniformity on all the people, and it's called an inferior form of unity. In fact, other people would say it's a caricature of unity. It's a parody of unity. The unfortunate thing is that let's not say it that way, some of us have been infected by that contagious disease. So if we look at a lot of Muslims, also our idea is we have to have unity, but it means we should all be the same. We should all dress the same way. Same pant length, same color of clothing, same this or that. And I know I've met people like this, and you probably have too. But I've met with people that are so disturbed by the fact that we have different schools of thought, we have different this, we have different names. And it's like, well, we did have that, but we still had coherence. We had unity where it counts. And we were able to live with diversity. And this is one of the reasons why the issue of uniformity is important to us today, because who among us does not want to have unity? We had it at one time. Immense cultural, economic, social unity. And we want to get it back. And it's sort of our natural instinct to do that. But don't play the uniformity card, because that won't work. That won't work. And of course it leads also to the fact that we have no toleration anymore for diversity, right? And in the past we did. I mean, in the past, Sunni-Shia relations, for example, usually were very good and very positive. We lived as neighbors. We didn't offend each other. This was the case here in the subcontinent. This was the case in Iraq. This was the case in many other countries. What happened? Bombing mosques and blowing them up and things like that. This is not unity and diversity. And this is not humane either. So we have to be very concerned about the uniformity part, because it really doesn't work. But then in the modern age also, and by the way, if we look at fascism or communism, often in the history of religions, they are called today secular alternatives to religion. Secular alternatives to religion, which is an important point to note, because they saw too, even though they were secular, maybe instinctively they saw that if I want to galvanize my society and I want it to work, then I've got to have something that meets the religious instincts of our people. So Adolf Hitler played this card really well, and he learned it from Joseph Stalin and others, and Mussolini as well. So these are secular alternatives to religion. Although they are secular, they will try to create a society that coheres, that has a quasi-religious flavor to it. Like the lights at nighttime, the music, the symbols, the art, and everything else. Then you have also, of course, in the modern age, especially in the age of globalism, and colonialism was a type of globalism. We were the globalists. We were the economic, social, and cultural globalists of the world. Let's just take one example. Marco Polo. He leaves the city of Venice to go to China, doesn't he? And he will travel over continents. And why does he go, by the way? Because Venice is one of the economic powerhouses of Europe at that time. Because he wants to know what we are doing in the East in collaboration with the Chinese. Because that was the economic system of the 13th and 14th centuries, was this incredible collaboration between the Chinese and between us in creating a new economic system, which, by the way, probably laid the foundation of capitalism. It was not itself capitalist, but with the breakdown of that system in the 14th century, which comes with the Black Death, bubonic plague, then the Europeans will be the first to recover, and they will create capitalism. And we taught them how to play this game of banks and checking and so forth, although we did it differently. So this is very important. But he wants to find out what's going on in China. Who are these people? Now Marco Polo, when he leaves Venice, he just goes a few days' journey and he is in an alien world. He is a foreigner everywhere he goes until he comes home. Right? When he came home, that same year, remarkably, another traveler sets out just to see the world. And who is that? Ibn Battuta from Tangier. He goes to pilgrimage and he says, well, let's see the world. You know? Ibn Battuta will travel 3 times as far as Marco Polo. 3 times as far as Marco Polo. And Ibn Battuta will never be an alien ever in his whole trip. Because even if he goes to China, which he did, he finds there the Muslim community of China. And he finds Muslim communities everywhere. And they also are living in harmony of roses or something like that. They get good characters. It's not funny, but you know, they say Yisilan. Yeah, if I say Yisilan, then it means this is a foreign religion. And for Chinese, that means, but we will never really accept it. So they call it Qing Jian Jiao, which means the religion of the real and the pure. Then the Chinese say, oh, wow, I'm interested in my neighbor. So you're part of our tradition too, aren't you? That's the wisdom of Confucius and of Lao Tzu. This is really intelligent, really, really intelligent. So Marco Polo, then, he reflects what? That global reality of that peacock's tail civilization. Thank you. What did I say? I always make this mistake. I need this ombudsman. Sometimes I listen to the things I say, I never give myself better than C+, C- usually. But I misspeak myself all the time. We won't say that out loud. But in the modern age, then you have people, especially in connection with globalism, who desire a pluralistic society. So this becomes, as you know, one of the ideals of the modern secular West, not, of course, of the fascists or of the communists, but of the capitalists in particular. Pluralism and individualism and humanism and human rights. And in a sense, word. And a lot of us Muslims, when we hear about human rights from the West, we are immediately cynical. And in fact, that means that we're intelligent. Because we always say, why are you and who are you to play this card? Because it never works when it needs to work. you have the worst human rights record in history. You are people that committed genocide, aren't you? Now you're talking about this? And then also, if, for example, right now, we're faced with a genocide in Burma, which is a definition case state genocide. Nobody wants to call it that. The United Nations refuses to call it that. Just as they wouldn't call Rwanda that, and they wouldn't call Bosnia that, and they don't call Syria that, because if they call it genocide, they are bound by their own charter to do something about it. Okay, well, that's hypocrisy. That's nothing short of that. So you taunt us with this claim of human rights, but you don't yourself ever apply it. Not when it's difficult to do so. And also you use it to tarnish our image because you imply that we didn't have that, even though the Charter of Universal Human Rights was, one of the main writers of it was a Muslim. So we had a part in that too. But this is an attempt to create an overarching pluralism, which is unity and diversity. But again, Toynbee, he would say, it doesn't work, and it won't work because it doesn't have backbone. It can't just be beautiful ideas. It can't just be utopian notions. It's got to have some kind of fundamental commitment in it that comes from religiosity. And that's why Toynbee also says that the rise of Nazi Germany is a major failure in Western civilization and in humanism as well. Because it proved, although the Germans were very humanistic, the Germans were among the most humanistic and liberal of all European people, believe it or not. But that humanism they had didn't have the teeth or the courage to stop the rise of fascism. In my own country, how much have we experimented with pluralism over the last decades, especially since the 1960s? And yet, when the right wing in my country, funded by think tanks that have billions of dollars behind them, begins to create the paradigms and cognitive frames that can lead to the present political chaos, and then of course you have the president of the United States exploit that to his own ends. Nobody can stop it, right? They don't have the conviction to see it for what it is or to stop it. So therefore you have to have a real, meaningful religious base to cohere. And again, this is an amazing thing, that we were able to do that. And we are, of course, very committed to what we believe, right? That's the most important thing for me or for you, is what I believe. And yet, I am able to live with a person who doesn't agree with any of that. And mostly for the Westerners, they can't believe that. That's why if they see that you're committed to what you believe and that you're not willing to say that, we're all okay. And, you're okay, I'm okay. What Jews believe is good and what Christians believe is good. And what everybody else believes is good. It's almost, if you don't do that, then we won't have toleration. Well, we have a different narrative, don't we? Because we believe strongly in our faith, and yet we are able, if we're properly educated in our faith and properly developed, to tolerate each other. Ibn Taymiyyah will talk a little bit later in the end, I hope. I don't know, maybe the time is passing. Oh my goodness. I haven't even really gotten halfway through. But, Ibn Taymiyyah, one of the biggest crimes in Islam, the most severely punished crime in Islam, is what we call hiraba. Hiraba, war against God and His Messenger. And that includes terrorism. But it's broader than terrorism. And it came to include terrorism, the terrorizing of populations. So they have no sense of security. They live in fear. This was the biggest crime of all. And again, Ibn Taymiyyah, when he talks about hiraba, he says, if a Muslim kills a Jew or a Christian in a quarrel, then it's an act of murder. But if he kills a Jew or a Christian because they are Jews and Christians, it is terrorism. And he must be killed. He must be educated. He must be executed. Okay, this is Ibn Taymiyyah. Ibn Taymiyyah, who himself wrote very excellent refutations of Judaism and Christianity. So it's not like he's really their friend. Certainly not theologically. But again, it's like you are protected in our society. Okay? So this is the other thing that I wanted to talk about, is that how did we do what we did? How did we get the peacock to live and to grow and to mature and to spread its tail? And of course this goes back to our teachings, doesn't it? And many aspects of our teachings. But one of those is the fact that the Prophet ﷺ, like all prophets and messengers, taught us to respect life. He taught us about the sanctity of life, animal life, plant life, and all human life. وَلَقَدْ كَرَّمْنَا بَنِي آدَمَ. We have honored the children of Adam, all of them. None of you believes until he loves for his brother what he loves for himself. All of you know that authentic hadith. And you probably also know that our commentators have always said, this is your brother in humanity. Not your brother, not just your brother or sister in Islam. But you don't truly believe until you want for all human beings what you want for yourself. Don't you want guidance? Don't you want understanding? Don't you want security? Don't you want peace? Even in war or in fighting, the Prophet ﷺ taught us never strike the face. Never. This is sahih, authentic, but don't strike the face. Because the human face, not just the Muslim face, any human face, because the human face is noble. The human face is Adamic. The human face, whatever face it is, it reflects this dignity that God has given human beings. We know the story of Cain and Abel, and this story is told in the Bible as well. But the Bible doesn't tell the commentary on it that we get in the Quran, and therefore, we wrote, or we ordained for the children of Israel, that whoever kills a single soul without life, it's as if he killed all human beings. So this is the dignity of human life. The Prophet was once sitting in Medina, and a funeral began to pass. And he stood up in honor of the dead man. And the Sahaba said, but it's only a Jew. This is Sahih. In Bukhari and Muslim. What did the Prophet say? Was he not a human being? Those are profound words, aren't they? Was he not a human being? So this instills in us then a respect for humanity. And we have to have that. And I want to say, without being romantic or idealistic, we did have that in the past. We did have, and that remained with us for a long time. Even in World War II, when the Nazis were hunting down the Jews in Europe or North Africa or wherever they went, who came to the aid of the Jews? Our people did. Our people did. And there are many examples of that. I know the story, for example, of a Jew from Lyon in France. He told us this story. He said that when the Nazis came into Lyon, they were hunting us down. And one of my relatives was running through the streets like a crazy man. And then he saw a Moroccan imam coming out of his mosque, dressed like the Moroccans often dress. And he ran up to him and he said, you have to save me. You have to help me. And the Moroccan said, "Are you a Jew?" And he said, "I don't know why, but I spoke the truth." I said, "Yes." He said, "Get inside. Get inside." And he hid him in the mosque and got him out to safety. The Paris mosque saved dozens of Jews. The Turks, who were, of course, secular at that time, but they also were getting the Jews out of Europe. The Muslim king of Albania would give Jews passports, Albanian passports, to get them out. In North Africa, the Germans said, "You have to help us get the Jews of North Africa," Ibn Badis and others. They said, "Never on your life. We've lived with these people for centuries. We will not give them up." This is who we are. And this is, again, look at the great Abd-Allah al-Jazairi, the great Mujahid Algiers and Algeria. And yet in Damascus, when the Muslims in ignorance are threatening the Christian community, he comes out with his guns and his mujahideen against the Muslims. And he says, "You will not touch them. You will not shed a drop of their blood." And again, this is our tradition. One of the things that I want to talk about, how are we doing for time? We're out of time, right? 5 minutes. He's giving me sadaqah. But, again, how did we do this? How did we house the human family? This is what I actually wanted to focus on. And so in 5 minutes, what can we say about it? You must have security. You must have safety. And we call that in Arabic aman. Aman. So aman is very, very important. And one of the reasons why terrorism, or hiraba, hiraba is bigger than terrorism, but it includes it, is the greatest crime of all, is because it destroys the sense of security. And I could give you quotations from great Islamic jurists. That's a matter of ijma', of consensus. That hiraba is the biggest crime of all because it destroys all sense of security. People are not safe. And people, Jews, Christians, whoever they may be, they've got to be safe. They've got to be protected. Only then can you have an economy. Only then can you have security. But the granting of securities was a very important thing. And therefore, the Prophet said, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, "Man qatala mu'ahidan lam yarih ra'ihat al-jannah وَرِيحُهَا يُوجَدُ مِنْ مَسِيرَةِ 40 سَنَةً." So he said, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, whoever kills a person who has a covenant. Now the person who has a covenant here is usually going to be a non-Muslim who we have given a covenant of security to. Who would give that covenant of security, by the way? The state? Of course the state would do that. Today, only the state does that. Only the state today grants visas, residence papers, working permits, citizenship, and so forth. And that's aman. Any person given a visa, whether coming into our countries or going out to other countries, they've got to be protected, and they have to respect the place they go to. They cannot violate any of the laws or blow up bombs or anything like that. Absolute treachery. One of the greatest crimes in Islam. They cannot do that. So whoever kills a person with an ahad, they will never smell the fragrance of the garden. They go to hell. Although the fragrance of the garden can be smelled at a distance of 40 years. In another hadith, these are sahih hadith, and these are matters of consensus among our jurists. In another hadith, the Prophet said, sallallahu وَذِمَّةُ الْمُسْلِمِينَ وَاحِدًا, which means how do we say that? The protection of security, or the granting of security of the Muslims, again, especially to non-Muslims, that's what it really means, is one. Meaning that it must be respected by all Muslims. Now, in the traditional Islamic state, any woman, any child, any man, even a fasiq who doesn't pray, who's not upright, they can grant a man. They can tell the Jew or Christian, come in, you're safe. And everybody has to respect it. If they make a mistake in that, let's say they gave a man to a group of spies, or to a group of brigands, or soldiers from the enemy army, then the governors, if they discover that, can annul the aman, but they cannot harm those people. This is well known in Islamic law. They have to usher them back to a safe area because they entered with aman. And of course they shouldn't have been given that aman, but they were given it. So it has to be respected. They've got to be ushered back to a safe place, and then we say, and don't come back. You're not welcome. So this is who we were. And the Prophet said, ذِمَّةُ الْمُسْلِمِينَ وَاحِدَةٌ. Their dhimma, their commitment to these agreements and these covenants of security is one. It must be respected by you and me and every one of us. فَمَنْ أَخْفَرَ مُسْلِمًا. Now this is a beautiful Arabic expression. Therefore, whoever betrays the aman that is given by any Muslim, that's what it means. You can look it up in the hadith books. Whoever betrays the covenant of security that any Muslim has given, فَعَلَيْهِ لَعْنَةُ اللَّهِ وَالْمَلَائِكَةِ وَالنَّاسِ أَجْمَعِينَ لَا يُقْبَلُ مِنْهُ صَرْفٌ وَلَا عَدْلٌ. Upon him will be the curse of God, the angels, and all human beings. No substitute or recompense will ever be accepted from him. We live in really difficult times, and your country is under attack. You know that better than I do. And your country is extremely important, and it has survived, and that's a miracle. And it's a credit to you and to your integrity. And it's got to survive. It's absolutely essential that it survive, and it will, inshallah. But no matter what they do to us, we've got to be people of dignity. That if I give you security, you're safe here. You're not going to be kidnapped. You're not going to be killed. And if I go to your country and you give me a visa or residence paper, I'm not going to betray you either. This is basic Islamic law. And I'm going to have to end with that. And in the time left, I'm very happy to entertain whatever questions you have, if I can.
Thank you very much. Covered a wide lot of ground. We open it up for questions.
It was genuinely refreshing to hear someone talk about how Islamic civilization or Islam as a religion could provide a source of cohesion and a source of unity for all of humanity today. But so even though it is refreshing, what do we do about the doubts that have been created by scholars of Muslim history who talk about how the idea of a universal Muslim civilization that shares some common features across time and space, be it from the Ottoman Empire to the Bengal and East Asia, works such as Shahab Ahmad's What is Islam or Sami Aiding's The Idea of a Muslim World, which sort of talk about how Islam as a singular or as a universal is itself a very modern construct.
This is the problem that postmodernism has. It's not. And we have got to understand postmodernism and modernism. Heidegger, in his early writings, he said modern man has assumed for himself in arrogance two attributes of God: knowledge and power. He knows everything, meaning science and technology. Anything that goes beyond the scope of science and technology. He doesn't know that that's not knowledge. And power, which is technology, basically economics. The postmodernists will say that there's nothing but power. There's no knowledge, there's nothing known. It's all power games, it's elites. And this is something that we have to respond to very intelligently, but it's not true. We had, not a civilization, civilizations. Wherever we went, we created civilizations. We brought West Africa together. We gave it an economic market. When we went into Sicily and Spain and Portugal, we abolished feudalism, and we did it so easily. And this made that one of the richest cultures and civilizations and economies that the world ever saw. These are not realities. We've got to be very adept. We've got to understand modernism. And I would also say that we have to have a new field called Occidentalism. Just as the West created centuries ago Orientalism, we were always in the Occident, by the way. We are the most Western of all Western people and the most Eastern of all Eastern people, and we're in between. But we really have to know, what is the West? How did it develop? And you were an essential part of that picture. You cannot understand the West in any way if you don't understand what we were doing, the role we played in that. Can you understand Thomas Aquinas without understanding Averroes? Where did we get cowboy hats and spurs and lassos and bolero jackets and the whole cowboy culture? Where did that come from? We have it in my country. George Bush was so proud of his cowboy hat. Where did we get that? Muslim Spain. That is Berber culture. And we could go on in this. So really, the study of Occidentalism, including the rise of modernity, the rise of postmodernism, this is really important.
How can we gain the himma in developing this sensibility?
Well, how do we gain the himma? I believe that Islam is service and love. Is service and love. And I believe this is the message of the Prophet. And this is the message of Ahlul Bayt. Is serving and love. After the death of Imam Ali, of Imam al-Hussein in Karbala, Zayn al-Abidin put together students that he taught. And he developed them, and he sent them all through the world to teach true Islam. Why did he do this? I know myself from teachers from Ahlul Bayt that he did that because he knew that after this major crime, hearts would grow hard. And the deen would die. And therefore we have to bring the hearts back to life with love and with service. So this is what we have to do. And those of us who believe this, and I think everybody here does, we have to work together. We have to work together. And inshallah, we can make the changes, bi'idhnillah ta'ala. As Gandhi said, be the change you want to see. So let us be that change. We have to have leaders. We have to have leaders. And you people, are people that are in line up to be leaders. So you've got to be good examples. You've got to keep the trusts. And I think that, it's very difficult to corrupt people. Did you know that? It's hard to believe that today because there's so much corruption. But do you realize how difficult it was to get where we are today? It's very difficult to corrupt people because it's not our nature. It is not difficult to take corrupt people and to bring them back to their primordial self and to bring them back to goodness.
Thank you for a pretty informative talk. Earlier in your conversation, you said that the religious instinct is the most powerful human instinct. I think the theist would most certainly agree with you, but the atheist would have a very hard time finding the conversation.
What makes you say that the religious instinct is a pretty powerful and important instinct?
We say that because of the fact that we find throughout human history that human beings are always religious. And we find that atheism occurs from time to time. Atheism occurs in China. It occurred in the subcontinent among the Vedic peoples, the proto-Hindus and the Hindus and others. It occurred among the Greeks. It never lasts. It never takes. The 20th century is the most atheistic century in history. And when we grew up, we were even taught that you have to bid religion farewell by the end of the century. And yet we see at the end of the century that religion is coming back. So we can just look at history, and also you have great studies. Like one of the greatest studies is by Wilhelm Schmidt. He's a German. I like him a lot. And he spent his whole life studying what people call primitive religion. We call it micro-religion. And he showed that all primitive religions, which are kinship group religions, very isolated in the world, like the Aborigines of Australia, like the Pygmies of the Andaman Islands, like the Eskimos and others, they all believe in one God. All of them believe in one God. They're not animists. No, that's a falsification. And he gives proof for that. Okay, and then also this shows that this basic religious ideas are universal. So these are the kind of things that became proofs for that teaching that human beings are homo religiosus. And then you have the secular alternatives to religion. Because Adolf Hitler knew that if he didn't give his fascism religious teeth, like the swastika, which in German you call it the broken cross. It's a powerful symbol for the Christian mind, that you're not going to work. And Joseph Stalin knew the same thing. He creates the cult of Father Stalin, and the people call him our Father, just like our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. So secular alternative religion, we have a lot of them today, don't we? The World Cup. I'm not going to say it's haram, but the emotion that people put into soccer, football, as most of the world calls it, this is a religious fervor, isn't it? And they fight each other. And you have heart attacks. You know that if my team is not going to win this game, I just collapse, right? It's like, this is just a game. It's just a ball they're kicking. It's not going to change the world.
Please.
So my question is, isn't this topic and subject to context, time, and history?
Well, didn't I do that? Did I do it?
I mean, its application in this moment.
Application.
Well, that's why I gave the lecture. That we want to apply this in Pakistan. And again, I ask your pardon that I got all over the place and I didn't really come to the core until the last 10 minutes. That's my fault. But, that we have to be people of trust. We have to be people that are visitors, the people who come here, and ourselves, when we go or live abroad, are safe.
Is this practical according to the global context at this point? Can we really do that?
Well, we have to do it. And, we would, if we had more time and you could explain exactly what you mean, then I think I could respond better. My understanding of what you're saying, that you get got the beard and he may spend $2 in their pockets. So a lot of here, I'd like to give you the example you all know of Salah ad-Din Ayyubi. That, and he is the disciple of Sheikh Abd-Allah Jilani. But Salah, how your rivers in the Himalayas are dammed up against international law. And nobody does anything. Nobody cares anything. So we have to be intelligent. We have to get our story out. And one of the rules of propaganda and also of teaching the truth is you've got to use every form of media available. This is a principle. You can't just use lectures. You can't just use a television program. You've got to do that, but you've got to cover all the bases, even Telegram and Twitter and WhatsApp and YouTube, you know, and we need to do this, and you can do this. You have the ability to do that. We've got to tell our story.
Any other questions?
You talk often about how we need to write our history. This is one of the lectures in which you say that, but why would we do that? Well, how do we teach our children? This morning I was giving a lecture on Vikings to my child, and we saw your YouTube video on how Muslims and Vikings came in contact. But we can't keep relying on your lectures. I mean, can you tell us some sources that we can use, some books?
Burial cloths that have Allah written on them in Kufic. And some people ask me to explain that. Most of my students could explain it to them. Many Vikings were Muslims. And the encounter of the Vikings with Muslim Portugal and Spain is one of your greatest stories, and it's a true story. And it has fantastic ramifications. I mean, this is not one movie. This is a whole series of movies. And we went to Denmark. We studied the Vikings. Many of them converted. You know, and in fact, in the end, that story will lead to something which is very important to me because my lineage is Swiss. And Islam was in Switzerland how many years? 150. 150. How come you don't know that, sister? How come you don't know that, brother? You've got to teach your own history. We know it's a historical fact. The medieval historians know it's a historical fact. From about 900 to 1050, you have a strong presence of Muslims in Switzerland, a positive presence from the Swiss point of view. And isn't that an important story to tell? You know, so if you don't tell your story, nobody else. And who understands your story but you? You know, again, you don't expect a Christian to understand Jewish history. They don't get it really. And you don't expect a Jew to necessarily understand Christian history. You know, but, you know, brothers and sisters, we've got so much work to do. And one of the things I would dream, you know, of happening from these contacts that we have is that together we begin to pool our resources and use our technologies and to begin to produce the kind of literature that we need. There are books, and one of the projects that we're working on right now is bibliographies. That, you know, to get bibliographies, read this, read that. They're good books to read, but most of the things are not in one book. I myself was a student of history, and one of the things you learn in history is that you'll never get it from a single book ever. You've got to read all kinds of books, all kinds of articles, and you've got to also pay attention to details that seem absurd. Let me give you one example. I was reading about the history of ancient America, which is America before Columbus. And this was in a beautiful German history of pre-Columbian America. And he mentioned that the Indians didn't have many domesticated animals. They had dogs, they had turkeys, they had some other things, but their dogs were barkless. Okay, so I make a note of that. This is the kind of idiot I am. Let me say, who cares if they had barkless dogs? Well, I just know that's important. So I write it down. Barkless dogs. Then when I go to West Africa, which was maybe 5 years later, 6 years later, I discovered that the Mandinkas, who are a very important tribe in West Africa, and who, wallahi, I can prove it to you, they crossed the Atlantic in 1315 with 2,500 boats, taking dogs with them. And Mandinka dogs are what? Barkless. Oh, was I happy. I couldn't sleep that night. All right? And so this is history. You've got to pay attention to the details. Yeah, and other people are not going to pay attention to them, and other people will be bored to death by them, but you can't be. You've got to be attentive. And and again, we will tell the West its story. We will tell America its story. We have been there all the time. From the time the Europeans came, we came with them. And we came also sometimes against them. We had corsairs. I was once in Barbados, this beautiful island of Barbados. And I went to the best historian I knew there. And I want to know about pirates, because pirates are also important in history. And so I said, tell me about the pirates and how the pirates would come to Barbados. And he told me. And I said, and what about the corsairs? The corsairs are us. And he said, well, the pirates would come in one ship or two, but the corsairs came in fleets. What? The corsairs came in fleets. Is that not historically important? But why doesn't anybody tell that story? If you don't tell your story, nobody else will. And again, you'll find that when you begin to dig, you'll find more. I wrote this book, Muslim in Victorian America. I wish you'd read it. The Life of Alexander Russell Webb. He was the Muslim Forrest Gump. He was there in the middle of everything, not intending to be there. Chicago's going to have a fire. Who will be there? Alexander Russell Webb gets burned out in the Chicago fire. And Jesse James, he'll be there reporting on Jesse James. Everything. Mark Twain, he knew Mark Twain. He had a close, and Mark Twain even makes jokes about Webb. They were close friends, because Webb was believed, for Mark Twain, Webb was a Missouri Muslim, because Twain only knew him in Missouri. He didn't know he was from New York State. And Twain in Tom Sawyer Abroad tells that Huck and Tom and Jim take this big balloon by chance over Africa. Read the book if you want to, it's funny. And then they come over Egypt, and Tom says, this is Egypt, and Jim says, we've got to go down, because this is the land of Moses. Moses was a Presbyterian, and I'm a Presbyterian. We've got to go down and pray. And then they go down into Cairo, and they go into these big mosques, huge mosques. And Huck says, that mosque was so big, it makes our churches in Hannibal look like boxes of dry goods. And then they get dizzy watching the dervishes turn. Of course, you know that in Cairo they didn't have dervishes, and the mosques are not filled with dervishes, but this is fiction. And Huck gets dizzy watching the dervishes twirl. And Tom says, well, you know they're all Muslims. And Huck says, what's a Muslim? And he said, it's always like, stupid. Tom said, a Muslim is a person who's not a Presbyterian. And so then Huck says, then there's lots of them in Missouri. I didn't know that. But see, that's a joke for Alexander Russell Webb. And it's written after Webb began this mission. And again, most Americans would have thought of Webb. So you've got to tell the story. Anyway, we wrote this book, and I tried to write it in such a way as to tell about the ethos of the United States of America. Like, who are we? How did we become what we are? What is our culture? And we talk mostly about blacks, and we talk about the Native Americans, and we talk about the whites and the Mexicans. These are the four groups that are really important. And I did this as carefully as I could. We finished the book. Okay, so mashallah, we worked 6 years on it. And I would say 70% of it is original research. And I had workers helping me, sisters and brothers. They did a lot of work for me. I could have never done it myself. As soon as we're finished with the book, Sheikh Hamza Yusuf, God bless him, discovers George Bethune English. George Bethune English. This is like a gift from God to us. Okay, well, you finished Webb's story. Let's tell you a story that's even greater. George Bethune English, who became a Muslim in the days of Thomas Jefferson and John Adams, and who was close to the so-called founding father. and who knew Arabic and Turkish and knew the Quran in Arabic. And he spoke Turkish so well, he was believed to be an Ottoman Turk. Wow! Valedictorian of Harvard University. He's even a more knowledgeable Muslim than well and committed. He says, he will say even when he travels in Egypt, today I found a Muslim who actually followed the Quran. Because he knew most of them don't. And then I myself discovered by chance, a few years later, I'm really happy about this, Anthony Fansale, who is the son of Murad Rais, the great Corsair captain. He is his son. And he came to New York City in 1630, and he is one of the founders of New York, and he spoke Arabic, and he was a Dutch Muslim. Half Dutch, half we don't know what else. He was tawny in color. He's about 6'4", powerful man, wealthy. His father's a Corsair. What do you expect? You know, he's the big money lender of Manhattan, and he gets in trouble because he puts guns in people's faces. He's nasty. But whose faces did he put guns in? Slave drivers. Stop beating the slave or I'll shoot you. That's interesting, isn't it? And then they don't like he's a Muslim either, and they try to get him out of Manhattan. He goes to the Dutch West Indies Company. Of course, he's got a lot of money. We don't want you to leave. And they say, why don't you go to Brooklyn? So he founds Brooklyn, which was called Turk's Island. And then he owns Long Island. Isn't that a story worth telling? He owned Wall Street, for God's sake. Of course, they didn't do investments in those days. Wall Street was the wall where the city ended. He owned Wall Street. What if you owned it today? Wouldn't that be good? You know? But then, who are the descendants of Anthony Fansale? One of my favorites, I don't know if you people know him. I know that the ones who have hair my color, they do. Humphrey Bogart. I love Humphrey Bogart. And if you go watch him in the films, you love him too. Casablanca, Play It Again, Sam. Jacqueline Kennedy, the First Lady, is a descendant of Murad Rais, the Corsair. And so is the whole Vanderbilt family. Vanderbilt University. And all the Whitney family, the cotton gin. Now, is that not important? And we have to tell our story. But that came to light after the book. And of course, many people knew it. Those families knew it. They kept his mushaf in their possession for generations, and then they sold it at an auction for a huge price. But, you know, we've got a lot of work to do. It's not a one-man show. And it's not a one-woman show. We've got to work together. We need millions, don't we? And we need human resources, and you are those human resources. We can do it, inshallah. And, you know, forgive me for talking so much, but, you know, the coin of hate has a flip side. What's that flip side? Flip the coin. Love. Hate easily becomes love, especially when you see that I hated you for the wrong reasons. They lied to me. You're so beautiful, and I was told you were so ugly. This is the game they're playing today. And I would say I have a very inflated idea about my country, but they're doing it because of us, because, you know, we belong to those people. We are their flesh and blood. We're also their leaders. You know, my grandfather signed the Declaration of Independence, right? Lyman Hall, you know, from the state of Georgia. One of my grandfathers was in the Constitutional Congress. So this is not my country. You know, I don't have a role here to play. Just let my people listen to me, and to Sheikh Hamza, and to others. And that's why it's almost like you've got to stack all the odds against you. We'll turn it around, baby. We'll turn it around.
It's late. I think we're in the middle of midterms week. Over the past 4 or 5 minutes, you heard some really new stuff. I thought Alexander Russell Webb was the only Muslim, American Muslim. It goes far back, much more. It does this much more. So in addition to the discovery of facts that we already don't know, that there's a whole world out there. I would like to go back to how Dr. Abd-Allah began his presentation, which first time I've heard it, I've heard this being put in these words. Often it is understood or believed that when the Quran comes, what does it do to the previous revelations? What have you been taught, or what have you learned? That after the Quran comes, what happens to the previous revelations? Anyone? Nice and loud. What does the Quran do to the previous revelations?
Invalidate.
It
Abrogate.
the word is abrogation. How did Dr. Abdullah begin his presentation? That the Quran comes as Muhaymin, and Muhaymin means to protect previous revelations. And that is a part of our tradition. There are scholars in our tradition, and not minor scholars, major scholars, who offer this interpretation. Yes, in certain terms, the Quran does come to abrogate certain parts of previous revelations. Yes, but that same scholar is probably going to say on the next page that the Quran has also come to protect previous revelations. So it's doing both of these things at the same time. That was a big aha moment for me.
Could I just add something?
Please, yes.
I would just like to give you one example. So, in the Gospels, in the Gospel of John, you have the story of the Paraclete. Many of you know this. Jesus says that I've been with you a short time, I must go. And the disciples are saddened. He said, I have to go because if I don't go, the Paraclete will not come. And the Paraclete is a man by the feather. Man. And he said, and the Paraclete will guide you into all truth, and he will tell the world the truth about me. So that's the idea, you see? That's what we do. We tell the truth about what, we don't abrogate the truth, we abrogate what was not true.
Then after saying that the Quran comes as Muhaymin for the previous revelations, that Dr. Abdullah went on to discuss how this has been understood and practiced by Muslims in the course of history, the peacock's tail. After that, he went on to discuss the attempts to impose uniformity in more modern times, fascism, communism, so on and so forth, how those attempts have failed. And the primary reason why they have failed, according to Dr. Abdullah, is because they do not adequately respond to what is the strongest of the human instincts, which is the religious instinct. And that was a second aha moment for me. But that is from the university side. In the university, we're taught either about Homo economicus, whatever the word is, Homo sapien, Homo sexualis, I just made that word up, but that's Freud. But Homo religiosus is not a part of the discussion in the university. And it goes back to the first question that was asked, or the second question that was asked. Why not? Is the evidence that is out there about Homo religiosus or human beings being, or the religious instinct being very, very strong in the human being, if not the strongest of the instincts, how seriously is that evidence studied in the university? How seriously is this hypothesis investigated in the university? And how seriously is the search to confirm or disconfirm this hypothesis? When this hypothesis does not even exist in the university, when the basic foundational dogmas on which the university is based rule out this hypothesis right from the beginning, then there is not going to be any discussion. So whether we are on the religious side, we find that our understanding of our tradition has been truncated. We're taught one side of the tradition and not the other side. And in the university, it is obviously clear that there are certain hypotheses which are totally off limits. They are not to be investigated. Should you dare to pursue that line of investigation, you will have a very short career in these walls. And on both sides, that truncated religious side or the truncated university side, if you look at unity and uniformity, it is an attempt to reduce all diversity to uniformity. The inability to imagine a paradigm in which there can be diversity and unity simultaneously. We are most grateful to Dr. Abd-Allah for taking the time and sharing his insights with us. There's a lot of food for thought, and I don't know, maybe inshallah we see him again next year.
I hope
around
so.
this time.
I hope so. And don't tell this to other people, but coming to see you is the high point. I love all the universities that I see, and they're incredible. None of them is not. But for some reason, I really love to be here, and I love to speak to you. And you're amazing students. And may we work together. May we be able to do something together, all of us, to give me that